Captain John Mason stood on the bridge of the Earth ship Horizon his eyes fixed on the swirling planet that filled the main screen. The planet was a mix of deep purples and angry reds, with storm clouds that moved too fast to be natural. "What do we know about this one?" John asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. Lisa Baker, the ship's science officer, checked her datapad. "It's called Ferox. The Galactic Council has it marked as uninhabitable. Category 5. Their highest danger rating." John raised an eyebrow. The Galactic Council rarely gave out Category 5 ratings. In the 10 years since humans had joined the 27 alien species of the Council, only 3 planets had earned that label. "What makes it so dangerous?" he asked. Lisa scrolled through her notes. "Almost everything. The atmosphere has acid rain. The gravity shifts without warning. The plants are carnivorous. The animals are worse." She looked up. The Council report says 3 separate species tried to set up colonies. None lasted more than a month. Steve Clark, the ship's engineer, laughed from his station. "So they quit after the first try." Typical Council thinking. John smiled. The alien species of the Council were advanced, but they lacked human stubbornness. When faced with problems, they looked for the easiest solution, not necessarily the best one. "We're just here to map it," John reminded them. "Standard orbit, full sensor sweep, then we move on to the next system." The Horizon was a small exploration ship with a crew of just 4 humans. Their job was to check unexplored systems at the edge of Council space and report back anything interesting. It wasn't exciting work, but John enjoyed the freedom. Diane Wright, the medical officer, joined them on the bridge. "I was reading about Ferox in the Council database. They call it the Untamable world." John was about to reply when the ship's alarm blared. The ship's sensors hadn't detected the meteors until they were almost on top of them. John grabbed his chair as the first impacts rocked the Horizon. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered. Steve's hands flew over the controls, but the meteors were everywhere. The ship shuddered with each hit. "Engine 3 is down," Steve called out. "Hull breach on deck 2. Automatic seals engaged." Lisa checked her screen. "These aren't normal meteors. They're changing direction to follow us." Another hit sent sparks flying from the control panel. The main lights went out, replaced by the dull red of emergency lighting. "We've lost main power," Steve said, his voice calm despite the situation. "Backup systems online, but we can't outrun them." John looked at the planet below them. "What about the atmosphere? Could we use it as a shield?" Lisa shook her head. "The Council specifically warns against entering Ferox's atmosphere without heavy shielding. The acid content alone would." Another hit cut her off. The ship lurched to one side. "We just lost Engine 1, Steve reported. "We're running out of options, Captain." John made his decision. "Take us into the atmosphere, Steve. Shallow angle. Try to skim it." "Captain," Lisa protested. "The Council reports." "We'll have to be wrong this time," John finished for her. "It's either acid rain or those meteors, and at least we have some protection against the rain." Steve nodded and adjusted their course. The Horizon dipped toward the angry swirl of clouds. The meteors followed, but as soon as they hit the upper atmosphere, they began to break apart. John allowed himself a small smile of relief. Then the ship shuddered again, harder than before. "What was that?" John asked. Steve's face was grim. "Engine 2 just failed. We don't have enough power to maintain orbit or get back to space." "Can we land?" John asked. Steve hesitated. "Maybe, if we find a flat area and come in really slow." "Do it," John ordered. He turned to the others. "Strap in and prepare for emergency landing." As the Horizon descended through the clouds, John thought about the Council's warning. No one had successfully established a presence on Ferox. The planet had defeated every attempt. But then, No human had tried yet. The ship broke through the cloud layer, revealing a landscape of sharp purple mountains and deep valleys filled with strange red vegetation. Acid rain streaked past the viewports, leaving trails on the glass. There, John pointed to a relatively flat area between two mountains. "Can we make it?" Steve didn't answer immediately, his focus entirely on the failing ship's controls. Finally, he nodded. "I think so. It won't be pretty." John looked at his crew, Lisa, Steve, and Diane. They were scared but determined. They were human, after all. And humans didn't give up easily. "Let's show this untamable world what humans can do," John said. The Horizon continued its descent toward the surface of Ferox, the world no one had been able to tame. The landing was rough. The Horizon bounced twice before sliding to a stop in the red dirt. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the pinging of cooling metal and the steady drum of acid rain on the hull. John unstrapped himself and checked on his crew. "Everyone okay?" Diane rubbed her shoulder where the safety harness had dug in. "A few bruises, but we're alive." "Barely," Steve added. He was already checking the ship's systems. "Main engines are completely offline. Life support is working, but we're leaking power somewhere." Lisa was staring at her datapad. "The atmosphere outside is toxic. The acid rain would burn through our regular suits in minutes. And the gravity," she frowned, "it's fluctuating. Right now it's close to Earth normal, but the Council reports say it can suddenly double or drop to almost nothing." John nodded. They had expected challenges, just not all at once. "First things first. Steve, what do we need to get off this planet?" Steve ran his hand through his hair. "New engines, basically. Or at least major repairs to the ones we have. We need to assess the damage from outside." "Which we can't do because of the acid rain," Diane pointed out. John walked to the viewport. The landscape outside was alien and hostile. Sharp purple rocks jutted from the ground like teeth. Red plants that looked like giant flytraps opened and closed rhythmically. In the distance, something large moved behind a ridge. "We have the heavy-duty environmental suits," John said. "They were designed for extreme conditions." Lisa shook her head. "They weren't designed for this. The Council report says." "The Council gave up," John interrupted. "We won't." He turned to Steve. "How long would the heavy suits last in this environment?" Steve calculated. "Maybe 30 minutes before the acid starts compromising the outer layer. Less if the gravity goes haywire." "Then we work in 30-minute shifts," John decided. "We need to assess the damage and gather any useful materials we can find nearby." Over the next week, they established a routine. Working in pairs, they ventured outside in the heavy suits, always keeping an eye on the timer. They discovered that the ship's damage was worse than they feared. Both main engines were beyond repair with their current tools. "We need at least 3 months to rebuild the engines," Steve told John on the 7th day. "And that's assuming we can find or make replacement parts." John nodded. "Then we need better shelter than the ship, something more permanent." Each day brought new challenges. The gravity shifted without warning, sometimes making them so heavy they could barely move, other times so light they had to tie themselves down to work. The acid rain came and went in unpredictable patterns. Twice, they had to rush back to the ship when large predators approached. 6-legged creatures with transparent skin showed their internal organs pulsing. On the 10th day, Lisa made an important discovery. The previous aliens tried to build traditional structures, she told the others, showing them images from the Council report. But look what happened. When the gravity shifted, the rigid buildings cracked and collapsed. John studied the images. "So we need something flexible, something that can adapt to changing conditions." They began building a new shelter near the ship. Instead of rigid walls, they created a tent-like structure using the ship's emergency supplies and materials they found nearby. They discovered that certain native fibers were resistant to the acid rain and wove them into their design. For water, they collected the acid rain in special containers, then filtered and neutralized it through a system Diane designed. For food, they relied on the ship's supplies while studying which native plants might be safe. By the end of the first month, they had a functional base camp. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. The flexible walls swayed during gravity shifts instead of breaking. The acid-resistant cover protected them from the rain. One evening, as they sat in their makeshift shelter, Diane said what they were all thinking. The council report said no one lasted more than a month here. We just proved them wrong. John smiled. This is just the beginning. We're not just trying to survive. We're learning how to live here. Outside, a distant howl echoed across the landscape. Ferox was testing them, but they weren't giving up. They were human, after all. And humans had a long history of thriving in places where no one thought they could. Tomorrow, John said, we start exploring beyond the camp. It's time to meet this planet on its own terms. Steve walked carefully through the red vegetation, scanning for useful materials. They needed metals to repair the ship's engines, and their sensors had detected something promising in this area. The heavy suit slowed him down, but it kept the acid rain from burning his skin. 15 minutes left, John's voice said through the radio. He was back at camp, monitoring Steve's suit readings. I'm close, Steve replied. Just past these trees. The trees weren't really trees. They were tall purple stalks that swayed even when there was no wind. Steve kept his distance from them. Last week, they had seen one of these stalks grab a six-legged predator and pull it in. They still didn't know where the animal went. Steve pushed through a thick patch of red grass. His boots sank into the soft ground with each step. The gravity was lighter today, making him feel bouncy. It would have been fun if it wasn't so dangerous. He reached a small clearing and stopped suddenly. Something was moving ahead of him. At first, Steve thought it was fog or mist. A swirling cloud of blue-gray particles hovered just above the ground. But as he watched, the cloud took shape. It formed what looked like a tall, thin figure with two arm-like extensions. John, Steve whispered into his radio. I'm seeing something. I think it might be alive. What is it? John asked. One of the predators. No, it's like... Steve struggled to find the right words. It's like a cloud that can think. The shape moved closer to Steve. It had no visible eyes, but somehow he knew it was looking at him. The cloud creature made no sound, but small flashes of light pulsed through its body. Steve took a step back, his hand moving to the small stun gun at his belt. The council had strict rules about contacting new species, but right now, those rules seemed very far away. The cloud creature stopped. More flashes of light pulsed through it, faster now. Then, to Steve's surprise, it moved to one side, as if inviting him to pass. I think it's trying to communicate, Steve told John. Be careful, John warned. Don't make any sudden moves. Steve slowly walked forward, keeping his eyes on the strange being. As he passed it, the cloud creature suddenly flowed around him like water, surrounding him completely. Steve froze, his heart racing. Steve, Steve. John's voice was urgent in his ear. The cloud was pressing against Steve's suit, but not aggressively. It was almost like it was curious, studying him. I'm okay, Steve said. It's not attacking. I think it's trying to understand what I am. After a moment, the cloud creature pulled back. It hovered in front of Steve again, flashing more lights from within its body. I'm going to try something, Steve said. He reached slowly to his belt and pulled out his small work light. He turned it on and off 3 times in a pattern. The cloud creature was still for a moment. Then it flashed lights in the exact same pattern. It copied me, Steve said, his voice filled with wonder. John, I think it's intelligent, really intelligent. Back at camp, Diane and Lisa gathered around John at the communication station. The council records never mentioned any intelligent native species, Lisa said, checking her datapad. Maybe they never stayed long enough to find them, Diane suggested. John nodded. Or maybe these beings didn't want to be found. Steve's voice came through again. I'm showing it different light patterns. It's copying everything perfectly. Wait, now it's showing me new patterns. Record everything, John instructed. But your suit time is almost up. You need to head back. I don't think it wants me to leave, Steve said. It's moving to block my path back to camp. John exchanged worried looks with Diane and Lisa. Try to communicate that you'll return. Use your light. For several tense minutes, they listened to Steve's attempts to convey his message. Finally, his voice came through again. I think it understands. It's moving aside. There was a pause. John, there are more of them now. At least a dozen, watching from the edge of the clearing. Come back slowly, John said. Don't run. It took Steve longer than usual to return to camp. When he finally walked through the door, his face was flushed with excitement. We need to learn to talk to them, he said immediately. They followed me halfway back. They're curious about us. They? Diane asked. Steve nodded. I'm calling them drifters. They drift through the air like clouds, but they think. They communicate. And I'm pretty sure they're the real reason no one has been able to tame this planet. Over the next few weeks, the humans worked on two important tasks. First, they needed to repair their ship. Second, they wanted to learn more about the drifters. Lisa created a special light device to help them communicate. It could flash in complex patterns much faster than their simple work lights. Diane studied how the drifters moved through the air and discovered something amazing. They can change their shape to flow through small spaces, she told the others one evening. That's how they survive here. When the gravity shifts, they just change their form. When the acid rain falls, they become more dense to protect themselves. Adaptation instead of resistance, John said. That's what we need to do too. The humans began to copy the drifters' approach. Instead of trying to build stronger walls to resist the planet's challenges, they created systems that could change and adapt. For the gravity problem, Steve designed special boots with magnets that could be turned on when gravity got too light. When gravity became too heavy, the boots had small lifters to help them move. For the acid rain, they collected it instead of hiding from it. Lisa built a system that turned the acid into clean water and even pulled useful chemicals from it. The aliens who came before us saw the acid as an enemy, Lisa explained, but it's actually a resource if you know how to use it. The drifters watched everything the humans did. At first, they stayed far away. Then, day by day, they came closer. One drifter, which had a slightly greener tint than the others, seemed especially curious. Steve named it Spark because it flashed its lights more often than the others. Spark began to show them things about the planet. It led them to caves where they found rare metals needed for their repairs. It warned them when dangerous animals were nearby. When a big gravity shift was coming, Spark would flash a special pattern so they could prepare. John realized something important. The drifters aren't just surviving here. They're working with the planet. They understand it. 2 months after landing, Steve had a breakthrough with the ship repairs. I think I can get one engine working, he told John. Not enough to get us to space, but enough to move the ship to a safer location before the storm season. The drifters had shown them that the area where they landed would soon be hit by massive storms that came every year. They needed to move to higher ground. As Steve worked on the engine, John noticed something strange. Whenever Steve had a problem he couldn't solve, Spark would hover nearby and flash lights at certain tools or parts. I think it's trying to help, John said. Steve looked up from his work. I think you're right. Yesterday I couldn't figure out how to fix the cooling system. Spark kept flashing at this valve here. When I replaced it, the system started working. Diane joined them, carrying her data pad. I've been comparing notes with the council reports, she said. The aliens who tried to settle here before us all followed the same pattern. They arrived, built standard bases with the same designs they used on other planets, and then fought against everything that made Ferox different. They tried to change the planet instead of changing themselves, John said. Diane nodded, and every time, the planet won. She looked at the drifters hovering nearby. Or maybe the drifters won. I'm starting to think they might be protecting Ferox. That evening, as they prepared to test the repaired engine, Spark and 5 other drifters gathered near the ship. They flashed a pattern that Lisa's translator interpreted as careful/danger. I think they're worried about the engine test, Lisa said. John approached Spark. Using the light communicator, he flashed a pattern meaning help/show. To everyone's surprise, Spark flowed into the ship through a small vent. Inside, it hovered over the engine and flashed lights at specific sections. Steve followed, making adjustments where Spark indicated. When they finally started the engine, it ran perfectly. Human ingenuity plus drifter knowledge, Steve said with a smile. That's a powerful combination. John looked out at the strange landscape that had tried to kill them many times. Somehow, it felt less hostile now. Not tamed, exactly, but perhaps understood a little better. We're not conquering this planet, he said quietly. We're becoming part of it. 6 months had passed since the crash landing. The humans had moved their base to higher ground, safe from the coming storm season. With help from the drifters, they had built a new settlement that worked with Ferox's changing conditions instead of against them. One morning, as John was helping Steve check the ship's communications array, a light on the console suddenly blinked on. That's impossible, Steve said, staring at the light. What is it? John asked. We're picking up a signal. A ship is entering orbit. Steve's fingers flew over the controls. It's a Galactic Council vessel. A big one. Within an hour, they detected shuttlecraft heading toward the surface. John gathered everyone together. We need to be careful, he warned. The Council declared this planet off-limits. They might not be happy to find us living here. Lisa checked her datapad. According to the regulations, emergency landings are allowed. But we were supposed to call for rescue and wait, not build a settlement. And definitely not make friends with the natives, Diane added, looking at the drifters hovering nearby. Over a dozen of them now regularly visited the human settlement. 3 shuttlecraft landed near the human base. Tall, thin aliens with blue skin and 4 arms stepped out. They wore heavy protective suits and carried scanning equipment. Varlians, Lisa whispered. They're one of the oldest species in the Council. Very traditional, very rule-focused. A Varlian with special markings on its suit approached John. I am High Commander Zextar of the Galactic Council Security Force, it said through a translator. Your presence on this planet violates Council Directive 557B. You were to signal for rescue, not establish residence. John stood tall. We had no choice. Our communication system was damaged in the landing. We had to adapt to survive. Zextar looked around at the human settlement. Impossible. This planet has been classified as untamable. 3 Council species attempted settlement and failed. The conditions are too hostile. We didn't try to tame it, John explained. We learned to live with it instead. The Varlian's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been surprise. Regardless, you must evacuate immediately. We have received your automatic distress beacon and come to rescue you. John frowned. Their beacon had been damaged in the crash. They hadn't sent any signal. Suddenly, Spark and the other drifters flowed out from behind the buildings. They formed a circle around the humans, flashing warning patterns. The Varlians stepped back, raising their weapons. Native life forms. Hostile intent detected. No, John moved between the drifters and the Varlians. They're not hostile. They're intelligent. They've been helping us survive. Zextar lowered its weapon slightly. The survey teams reported no intelligent life, only dangerous predators and plant life. The survey teams didn't stay long enough to find them, Lisa said. The drifters are sentient and highly intelligent. We've developed a communication system with them. Zextar seemed unsure. It conferred with the other Varlians in their own language. Finally, it turned back to John. This changes nothing. The Council has plans for this planet. Its rare minerals are needed for new technologies. Once the storm season passes, terraforming ships will arrive to begin the process of making Ferox suitable for proper colonization. Terraforming? Diane asked. But that would destroy the current ecosystem. The drifters would die. Regrettable but necessary, Zexstar said coldly. The needs of the Council outweigh the needs of one primitive species. John felt anger rising in him. The drifters aren't primitive. They understand this planet better than any of us, and we won't let you destroy their home. Spark moved forward, flashing rapidly. Lysa translated. They say this has happened before. The metal beings come, try to change the world, then leave when the world fights back. Zexstar's translator processed Spark's light patterns. The Varlians seemed shocked. It is communicating. This is unexpected. Zexstar regained its composure. Nevertheless, the Council's decision is final. You have 1 day to gather your belongings and prepare for evacuation. As the Varlians returned to their shuttles, John gathered his crew and the drifters. I don't believe they just happened to find us now, he said quietly. Not after 6 months of silence. They said they received our distress beacon, Steve reminded him. But our beacon was destroyed in the crash. John looked at the departing shuttles. Exactly. They're lying. They didn't come to rescue us. They came to check if Ferox was ready for terraforming. Finding us alive was just a surprise. Lisa's face was grim. So what do we do now? John looked at Spark, then back at his crew. We protect our new home. After the Varlians left, John called an emergency meeting. The humans gathered in their main shelter while Spark and 5 other drifters hovered nearby. We need more information, John said. We can't fight the Council without understanding what they're really planning. Lisa nodded. I still have access to the Council database through our backup systems. Let me see what I can find about Ferox. While Lisa worked, Steve checked their defenses. We've got 1 working engine on the ship and a few makeshift weapons, but nothing that could stand against Council forces. Diane had been quiet, studying the drifters. I think there's something we're missing about them, she finally said. The way they interact with the planet isn't just adaptation. It's almost like, she paused, searching for the right words, almost like they're connected to it somehow. John was about to ask what she meant when Lisa called out from her station. I found something. The Council has classified files about Ferox. They've known about the drifters all along. Everyone gathered around her screen as she explained. According to these reports, the first survey team discovered the drifters 50 years ago. They classified them as a non-technological sentient species with limited value to the Council. Limited value. Steve's voice was angry. They're intelligent beings. Lisa continued reading. The real reason the Council wants Ferox is something called nexite. It's an extremely rare mineral that can store vast amounts of energy. The surveys show Ferox has the largest deposit ever discovered, and it's under the surface where the drifters live, Diane guessed. Lisa nodded. The terraforming isn't just to make the planet habitable for Council species. It's to change the atmosphere and surface conditions so they can begin large-scale mining. John looked at Spark. Can you explain this to them? We need to know if they understand what the Council plans to do. Lisa used their light communicator to translate. Spark's lights flashed rapidly in response. The pattern was so complex that Lisa's translator couldn't keep up. I think they already know, she said. They're trying to tell us something, but it's too complicated for our system. Diane moved closer to Spark. Maybe we don't need words. She reached her hand out slowly. To everyone's surprise, Spark flowed around her hand without touching it. Diane closed her eyes. For several minutes, no one moved or spoke. When Diane opened her eyes again, they were wide with amazement. They didn't show the other aliens this, she whispered. They didn't trust them. Show us what? John asked. The drifters and Ferox aren't separate, Diane explained. They're one entity. The drifters are like like the planet's nervous system. They can sense everything that happens on Ferox because they are Ferox. Everyone was silent as they processed this information. That's why the planet seems to fight back against invaders, Steve said slowly. It's not random. The drifters are protecting their larger self. Diane nodded. And that's why they helped us. They sensed that we were different from the others. We didn't try to change them or the planet. We adapted instead. John stood up. This changes everything. The Council isn't just planning to displace a native species. They're planning to kill a sentient planet. But how do we stop them? Steve asked. We're just 4 humans against the entire Galactic Council. John smiled. No, we're 4 humans and an entire living planet. Spark, he turned to the drifter. We want to help you. Can you show us how Ferox defends itself? Spark flashed a pattern that the translator interpreted as yes/together. Over the next day, the drifters led the humans to different parts of the planet. They showed them volcanic vents that could be triggered to create ash clouds. They revealed hidden cave systems where they could take shelter. They demonstrated how certain plants could release spores that would clog machinery. When they returned to the settlement, John gathered everyone together. The Varlians are coming back tomorrow, expecting us to leave quietly. I think we should give them a proper Ferox welcome instead. The humans worked through the night, preparing their defense. As the sun rose on the day the Varlians would return, John looked out at the strange world that had become their home. We might be the first species to try and tame Ferox, he said, but we learned something the Council never did. You don't tame a world like this. You earn its trust. The Varlian shuttles descended through Ferox's atmosphere the next morning. This time, there were 5 of them instead of 3. John watched from their lookout point as the shuttles landed in the same spot as before. High Commander Zextar stepped out first, followed by 20 armed guards. They all wore heavy protective suits against the acid rain and shifting gravity. They're not taking chances this time, Steve whispered. John nodded. Time to put our plan into action. Lisa, signal Spark. Lisa flashed a light pattern toward the mountains where hundreds of drifters had gathered. Immediately, they began to move. Some flowed into the ground. Others spread out in a wide circle around the Varlian landing site. John stepped forward as Zextar approached. Have you come to hear our decision? He asked calmly. Zextar's 4 eyes narrowed. There is no decision to make. You will evacuate immediately. The terraforming ships arrive in 30 days. We refuse, John said simply. Ferox is a living, thinking being. The drifters are part of it. We won't let you destroy them. The Varlian. 3 weeks passed without any word from the Galactic Council. The humans continued to improve their settlement, now with even more help from the drifters. They built new structures that could withstand the strongest gravity shifts. They created better acid rain collection systems that provided all the clean water they needed. Do you think they'll actually listen to us? Diane asked one evening as they sat outside, watching the strange purple sunset. They don't have much choice, Lisa said. I sent copies of our evidence to 3 different species before the Varlians left. If the Council tries to cover this up, the truth will still get out. John was about to respond when Steve called from the communication station. We're receiving a transmission. It's from the Council. They gathered around the screen as a message came through. It wasn't from Zextar, but from a different alien species, a Tellurian known for their wisdom and fairness. Greetings, humans of Earth, the Tellurian said. I am Elder Nax, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. We have reviewed your evidence and testimonies regarding planet Ferox and its sentient nature. After much debate, the Council has made a decision. Everyone held their breath. Ferox will be reclassified as a protected sentient world, with all mining and terraforming plans cancelled. The beings you call drifters are now recognized as an advanced intelligent species with full rights under Council law. Cheers erupted from the humans. Nearby, Spark and other drifters flashed bright patterns of light that looked like fireworks. Elder Nax continued. Furthermore, Your actions have led to a review of Council procedures regarding planetary assessment. 3 other worlds previously classified as hostile are now being reevaluated. The transmission paused. Then the Tellurian's voice softened. The Council offers you a choice. A ship can be sent to bring you home to Earth. Or, if you prefer, you may stay on Ferox as official Council representatives and teachers. Teachers, Steve asked. Your methods of adaptation, rather than domination, have proven valuable. Elder Nax explained. Many species wish to learn from you, and the drifters have expressed interest in greater communication with the galaxy, with humans as their interpreters. After the transmission ended, the 4 humans looked at each other. I need to go back, Lisa said after a long silence. My family must think I'm dead by now. Steve nodded. Me too, but he looked around at the settlement they had built. Part of me wants to stay. We could rotate, Diane suggested. Some of us go home, others stay. And maybe bring more people who want to learn. John walked outside, where Spark hovered nearby. Using the light communicator, he asked, "What do you want us to do?" Spark's response translated as, "Stay/teach/learn/grow/together." Over the next 6 months, the small human settlement on Ferox grew into something new. The Council sent a ship, but it brought supplies and volunteers instead of just taking people away. Scientists, engineers, and diplomats from Earth came to learn about Ferox and the drifters. Representatives from other Council species arrived too, eager to see how humans had succeeded where others had failed. John, now serving as the official Earth ambassador to Ferox, stood with Spark watching a group of newcomers learn how to communicate with the drifters. "Did you ever think we would end up here when we crashed?" Lisa asked, joining him. She had returned from Earth with the latest ship, bringing new light communication technology. John smiled. "Not exactly. But I always believed we would find a way to survive." "We did more than survive," Lisa said. "We changed how the Council sees the galaxy." Spark flashed a pattern that translated roughly as, "Not tamed/not conquered/understood/respected/partners." John nodded. The word untamable still appeared in Council records describing Ferox, but its meaning had changed. Now it was a mark of respect, not fear. In the distance, strange purple mountains stood against the red sky. Acid rain fell in the valley below, collected by systems the humans had designed. Gravity shifted gently, and the flexible buildings moved with it rather than fighting against it. Ferox remained wild and dangerous and beautiful, and humans, with their unique ability to adapt rather than conquer, had found their place within it, not as its masters, but as its students and friends. The only species bold enough to tame the untamable had learned that true strength came not from control, but from cooperation.